what did Emmanuel do when everybody went home? They said for 2 weeks, right? We're going to go home for 2 weeks, and we all thought, well, that's reasonable, right? There's a global pandemic. Let's all go home for 2 weeks. We work from home. Let's only go out when we have to. I mean, that seems like a reasonable response, and everybody, I think, was on board with that. Obviously, we know from there it got much more than 2 weeks, and we're still in it. And I think some people had the fear that it wasn't going to just be 2 weeks, but that was a reasonable request. But what was Emmanuel as a church, as an organization? What was their response to what was happening at that time?
Well, I think we had just finished our missions conference last year.
Yeah.
Next week, we're now the school's shutting down. Schools are shutting down. We shut down our school, in-person school. We went along with the pattern there because at that time we didn't know what we were dealing with.
No idea.
And so we took the virus seriously. There is a virus.
Yeah.
And people do get sick from it. And so we took it seriously. We didn't know what the scope was. We didn't know what the intensity was. And so we started taking our own precautions. But in any moment of crisis, and that's what this became, a matter of crisis of conscience, you have to resort to your principles. What is the guiding principle here? Mm-hmm. What is the core value that then informs me on what I ought to do? And so there was two ideas. First of all, the Bible commands us not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And so there is a natural gravity. The very definition of the New Testament church is to be local, to be visible, to assemble. The word church in the New Testament appears 114 times, and its very definition is a called out assembly.
Right.
It's used one time, the word ecclesia is used one time, and it meant a political gathering.
Yeah.
So it is the idea of physically assembling together.
Right.
So the church is defined by assembly, by coming together, by exercising itself that way. But not only, and so there was the principle of assembly, but there was also the principle that no one can come between us, a man, and his conscience. And so, understanding that it's not right for a government to tell an individual how they can worship God. They have to worship God by the dictates of their own conscience. And so Emmanuel approached this season with a principled approach that valued the safety of our church people. We wanted to make sure as we were trying to ascertain what was going on. And so as we got into the midst of March, we went to drive-in church services.
Yeah, I remember that.
We had six of them, 6 Sundays, 3. And I think once we knew what our guiding principles were, once we knew
Right.
that, okay, we got to be, the momentum has to be towards assembly. The principle has to be that we have to worship God by the dictates of our conscience, making full knowledge of what we are doing. We then came to strategic decisions. How do we strategically move the organization in that direction?
Right.
Because at this time, in those first couple of weeks, regardless if we closed the church or not, which we never did, our attendance, people were staying home.
Right.
And we were upping up our social game, and we were upping up our broadcasts and all those kind of things because we realized, rightfully so, and we told people, if you do not feel comfortable, stay home. But there's going to be a continuation. I think that was one of my ideas was continuity. We got to have continuity. We got to keep going. But then the strategic decision came about that understand, all right, we got to start leading people back this direction. So we had drive-in church.
Yeah.
And
for 6 weeks?
That was a success bigger than we could have ever imagined.
Yeah.
Because people were so hungry to get together. So people stayed in their car. I was on a lift, and I'm afraid of heights.
Yes.
You were up high. I was up high preaching, and as we were doing that, our goal was we're not going to surrender Easter.
Right.
Easter was coming because what is Easter? We're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're celebrating victory over death.
Right.
So how could we allow the fear of death to stop us from the victory, from the celebration of victory over
conquering death?
Yeah, conquering death. So we said we're not going to surrender Easter, and so we had probably the greatest Resurrection Sunday service that we've, at least in attendance wise, at Emmanuel ever.
Like almost 500 cars, right?
Yeah, there was
500.
over 600. They couldn't count over 600 people.
Yeah.
I mean, there were people in our parking lot, they're in the bank parking lot, they were all over the place. Of course, we were broadcasting this on an FM transmitter as well, so people could kind of be far away.
Within a mile of the church.
Yeah, and so we had a glorious Resurrection Sunday, and then
there were a lot of people watching online as well.
it was huge. It was huge, and that really kind of allow us to seize the momentum again, or here were these circumstances that were being thrown at us, and now we adjusted the sails, and we were starting to make momentum. In leadership, one of my biggest things is momentum, momentum.
Mighty Mo.
And that we were losing it. I mean, COVID just stopped everyone in its tracks. And so one of the very first things that I was most concerned about was like, how do we regain momentum? And drive-in church was a tool that the Lord allowed us to use to recapture the momentum.
Right.
It got everyone from running away to turning back and, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can go to church in a car,
right,
and sit there and be safe. And so that's what we did. And then after that, then we spent 3 more weeks outside, and the focus of that was knowing we have to come back in.
Right.
And so it was leading the congregation that way.
Yeah.